Davis is an ethnobotanist who journeyed to Haiti to explore the unknown, and he's documented his experiences in his book, The Serpent and the Rainbow. Now, I have been fascinated because I read the story about this man who was buried alive and who apparently lives. And is he a living being, or is he a dead living being?
Well, that's a philosophical question that takes us to the very frontier of death, Sonia. But the basic thing is that we had heard about zombies for many years, and according to these voodoo beliefs, zombies were the living dead, individuals who'd been buried, resuscitated magically from the grave by sorcery, and led away to face an uncertain fate, a fate that was generally described as enslavement. But we discovered in 1980 the first scientifically verifiable instance of this process, an individual who had died at an American-directed philanthropic institution, so we were able to get complete documentation of the event. This drew our attention to the reports of a folk poison. So what we really believe a zombie is somebody who's received this drug, which actually makes them appear to be dead, even though they are not dead, puts them, if you will, into a state of suspended animation that actually allows them to be buried alive.
Well, you're sounding a little bit about, or what I'm hearing is the Indian mystics or meditators who are able to reduce their heartbeat so that it was so low it was not detectable to humans. Is that the kind of thing you're talking about?
Well, there may be that kind of psychological element, and that sort of touched on the whole issue of
where maybe medically that could be done.
Yeah, that could be medically done, but it certainly can be done pharmacologically. Everybody in the audience who's ever gone into surgery, after all, has been put under. And what we were looking for was not really some mystic explanation of zombies, at least initially. At first, we were simply looking for a drug, not any drug, but a drug that could make someone appear to be dead, even though they're alive. And that was a drug that I was sent to Haiti to find. And what I had to do is get inside the secret societies and obtain its formula. Incredibly, Sonia, when I did that, I found out that they do have a drug, not any drug. It's a nerve poison, a poison which, if you can believe it, is about 160,000 times stronger than cocaine.
And when in using that drug, that's so potent, where is it extracted from?
It comes from a marine fish. And the incredible thing is that this fish has been a culinary delicacy in Japan for 1,000 years. As a result, when we looked at how the drug works, and what it does is it lowers metabolism to such a profound extent that the pulse is imperceptible, it brings on complete peripheral paralysis, and yet incredibly, consciousness is retained until the moment of death. And when we looked into the Japanese medical literature and looked at these literally hundreds of cases of individuals who have been poisoned by this fish, we found out that there were in fact cases in Japan of people nailed into their coffins by mistake. By folk custom throughout Japan, if you get poisoned by this fish, you're actually laid out by your coffin to make sure you're dead for 3 days. We found cases throughout the South Pacific of individuals pronounced dead who later returned to the realm of the living and remained conscious the whole time, up until the very moment of their revival. And this was extraordinary because it allowed us to put a scientific foundation beneath this myth of the zombie in Haiti, a myth that had been used for so long and placed in the realm of fantasy by
This is a really bizarre story, but let's move to the man, and perhaps you've met him. We've seen stories about the man who returned to life. Giuseppe?
No, his name was Clairvis Narcisse, Sonia, and what had made his case unique was that he died at an American-directed philanthropic institution. Therefore, the team of physicians and psychiatrists, who, by the way, included some of the most prominent psychopharmacologists and psychiatrists of this country, who looked into the case, were able to get hold of his death certificate, which included fingerprints, which the forensic experts at Scotland Yard verified, the medical dossier outlining his condition at death, all his lines of evidence.
What did he think of himself? You're telling me he was lying in his coffin, very much alive, as they're pouring dirt all over him?
He may clearly have been a passive observer of his own funeral. His own subjective experience, of course, is rooted into his own cultural beliefs, and those beliefs are rooted into voodoo itself. He said that he was aware of himself being pronounced dead, that he heard himself being declared dead by the physicians. He was buried. He was in a sort of a state of purgatory. He didn't know where he was, and he was taken out of the grave sometime later by a bokor, a sorcerer, who beat him and then led him away to a fate that he claimed to be enslavement.
Are there groups of people enslaving human beings using this method, or is this part of a religious practice?
We believe that there's no assembly line producing zombies in Haiti. On the contrary, for biological and chemical and social reasons, it's got to be an extremely rare event. What we later discovered, once I got hold of the preparation of the formula, once we had the case of Clairvis Narcisse, you had to, Sonia, ask a very interesting question: why would this be going on? And the answer lay in the Bizango secret societies. Haiti, in fact, is the rural parts of Haiti are dominated to some extent by clandestine secret voodoo societies, Bizongo societies. It turns out that zombification is not a random criminal activity. On the contrary, it's a form of punishment, a form of social sanction determined by societies that exist in the netherworld of the darkness, in the night in Haiti. This seems extraordinary until you understand the precedents of the Haitian people and realize how African they are. If you go back to West Africa, we know from the ethnographic literature to this day that secret societies are the most potent and powerful arbiter of social and political life in rural West Africa. And in fact, they have tribunals, judicial systems, and they determine guilt, innocence, and in fact, they execute people by the use and manipulation of natural poisons. This is exactly what is going on in Haiti.
So this is the justice system? Is that what you're telling me?
Exactly. To judge the Voodoo society or a Haitian society or the Haitian people by the existence of zombies would be as unjust as to judge American democracy by the electric chair. It's just, zombification is one small thread woven through an overall matrix of this extraordinary mystical society.
So the elders of the society decide that this person has acted contrary to the society's values, and they're going to take care of that?
Absolutely. In fact, when we looked into the case of Clervius Narcisse, we found out that he had been a complete pariah in his community at the time of his demise. He had been involved in a land dispute amongst many other disputes, but a land dispute that threatened the very economic well-being of his entire kindred. He was not an innocent victim, we don't believe. We think he was taken out and punished.
Well, let's go on a little further about voodoo, though. I mean, people believe in spells, and they cast things, and they have dolls.
No,
and
they
that's
don't.
All,
that's all myth. Let's back up and talk about voodoo. Voodoo is not a black magic cult. Voodoo is a complex metaphysical worldview. You know, Sonia, if I asked you to name the great religions of the world, what would you say?
Well, I'm sure that right off the top of my head there would be three. There would
Christianity,
be Christianity,
Judaism, Buddhism, Hinduism, whatever. Where's a continent that you'd leave out of the calculus? Sub-Saharan Africa. The tacit assumption being that black people have no religion. Well, of course they do. All voodoo is a distillation of legitimate African religious beliefs and practices that came over with the blacks during the great and tragic slave diaspora. Wherever the blacks went, they brought their religion. And that religion is not a black magic cult. It's a completely legitimate, and I call it, in fact, the quintessentially democratic religion, because in a way, the Voodooist not only has direct rapport with the spirit realm, he actually receives the spirits into his body. The way the Voodooists put it, the white man goes in the church and speaks about God, the Indian may eat peyote and speak to God, we dance in the temple and we become God. It's a beautiful, benign religion. Zombies is one small element of a whole voodoo society. In the same breath that you would speak of a Christian society, a Buddhist society, you can speak of a voodoo society, and within that world one finds completeness.
You now, however, have the chemical basis for the ability to make a zombie out of someone. Is that correct?
What we have is a chemical basis to allow someone to appear to be dead even though that person is in fact alive. Remember that any drug practice is rooted in culture. The Japanese victims of the fish don't become zombies, they become poison victims. What we do have is a drug which mediates a psychological and spiritual phenomena. Essentially, the creation of a zombie is something unique to a Haitian reality, to the Haitian mindset. And the book is really, as much as anything, an exploration of that mindset as it is a discovery of that drug.
You could be a paralyzing date. Is that what you're telling me?
I've been accused of that by people before.